Hello and welcome to Outlook's The Outlier. This is the show where we get top names in the fields of literature, the arts, music, science, politics, sports, and so on. But the people who feature here do not only excel in their fields, but are much more than that. They are true trendsetters. They break all rules. They're an inspiration to a younger generation. This week, our outlier is historian and author William Dalrymple. William has brought a certain thrill to history reading in India. He has this unique talent of going back in the past, of revisiting history and coming back with such new gems, such new nuggets and new facets that in the end, the book is really like a thriller. It reads like a thriller. Who would have, for instance, thought that there is anything else to be written about the East India Company? And yet, his latest book, his recent book, The Anarchy, exactly does that. He goes to that period, finds new stories, brings us new people and such fascinating characters that it is no wonder that the book is still in the bestsellers list of many newspapers and magazines. William is also, of course, the co-founder of Jaipur Literature Festival, which is billed as the largest and the greatest literary meet in the world. Thank you, William. It's a great delight to have you on The Outlier.
Thank you very much, Satish. Very nice to do anything for Outlook, my favorite magazine.
Oh, that's so kind of you. I wanted to ask you, you are such a outgoing person. You are so gregarious. You got this boundless energy. How has the lockdown been for you?
Well, I've loved it, actually, to be honest. I've got two sides, I suppose, to my personality. You're right. I love parties. I love getting out and seeing my friends. But I'm a writer, and I'm used to spending concentrated periods of time completely alone, focusing on books. And that's what I've done. I just slipped back into book mode. This is what I do when I write one of my history books. I lock myself away. I go on a diet. I work out a bit more than usual, and I try and keep a period of intense discipline just for a month or two, while not a month, sorry, just for 6 months or so, while I write a book. And I'm now deep in my next one. I haven't started writing, but I'm deep in the research and loving it.
You're looking very fit, I must say.
I've lost 16 kilos since the lockdown.
That's awesome. Many congratulations.
I'm even drinking a health drink of chia seeds as we speak. I haven't had the proper drink.
But in a beer mug.
10 weeks since I had an alcoholic drink.
But it's in a beer mug.
It's in a beer. It's giving the idea that it's beer, but it's not.
So, do you think this is true of other writers too? Do you think this fallow time is, there's going to be a sea of books, ocean of stories coming up for all of us?
I mean, I think we all have our different cycles. I was lucky in that I just finished a book and finished a book tour. So this was an ideal moment. I mean, I basically spent 9 months launching The Anarchy, starting in the United States. And I crossed the United States from LA right through to New York, went across Europe, went right through Britain, through India, Pakistan, Australia, and Southeast Asia. And I'd just come back from that completely exhausted when the lockdown started. And so I was right. I mean, to be honest, it was a real treat to spend a month at home with my kids and wife and catching up.
So the timing has really worked for you.
Perfect. I mean, really, genuinely, mashallah, I'm very, very lucky. And it's allowed me to do, 6 months work in 6 weeks or 10 weeks. Normally, my routine would be to work hard in the morning, get up early. In summer, maybe take a siesta, then have a second run through till about 6, and then go out and party. But there were no parties to be had. I've been working through till 9 o'clock every night, effectively doubling my work day. And it's, I'm loving this. It's a new period of history for me. 20 years, I've been writing this company quartet, starting with White Moguls in 2002 and ending with The Anarchy in 2020. And I'm now, for the first time, free to go and do other stuff I love. And I've always been interested, but never known much about ancient India and right up to the Gupta period and in a sense the golden age of high Indian culture, Kalidas and all that sort of stuff. And it's always been interesting to me, but I've never actually read a huge amount and this is good. So I've had a wonderful 10 weeks deep in ancient India. Part one of the book is about the way that Buddhism traveled northwards through what's now Pakistan and Afghanistan to become the state religion in China under the Empress Wu Zetian in the 7th century. And it's an extraordinary story how, China has always been a country that is very nationalistic, that has resisted ideas coming from outside, and yet this Indian idea, Buddhism, overtakes Confucianism. And for a lot of the Tang dynasty, Buddhism is the state religion of China. An extraordinary story in itself. Part two is the story of how Hinduism and Sanskrit travels through Southeast Asia, first to Sri Lanka and Burma, then on into the Malay Peninsula, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, and so on. And it isn't just religion, it's literature, Sanskrit, and the great epics, particularly the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, become major parts of the culture of all of Southeast Asia. Everyone knows the stories of Pandavas and so on. Right. And then finally, the third part of the book is how Indian ideas of astronomy and mathematics travel westwards. First of all, to Baghdad, to Abbasid Baghdad, where they become at the House of Wonders, the great center of translation set up by the Abbasid caliphs. They adopt first the Indian numeric system, which have been the numbers that we use today universally across the world, were invented by Ashoka. And Ashoka, the first examples we have of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we use, their ancestors are on the Ashoka inscriptions. And they travel, the Brahmi number system travels to Baghdad, and then eventually it's picked up by Fibonacci. And Fibonacci is a trading post and learns Arabic as his second language alongside Italian. And he uses this system and realizes that the Indian numerals plus the place value system, whereby you have noughts, tens, hundreds, thousands, and the decimal system, that this is an infinitely better way for making calculations than the Roman system. And Fibonacci introduced it to Renaissance Europe. So it's three parts, and it's all subjects that I've fascinating subjects that I've longed to read about and never had the chance before.
In fact, the very sound of it, I mean, it is so fascinating. But why is it that, popular history books in India are somehow considered, non-serious, are somehow considered a little lightweight, at least in some quarters, that, it is not academic enough, the rigor is not so much. Why is it, why is it that it's still in India?
I think you're quite right, Satish, that there is India has slightly fallen behind, I think, on the way that history is written today. It's still stuck in a kind of 1970s framework where there is, on one hand, academic history, which is scholarly, and then there's popular history, which is sort of unscholarly, and the idea is that these are two different worlds. Elsewhere, you have historians of the highest academic caliber writing for a general audience. An example would be, for example, Stephen Greenblatt, the greatest living Shakespearean, probably, the professor of English at Harvard, and yet he writes a book like The Swerve, which is aimed at a general intelligent audience, which wins the Pulitzer Prize and sits at the top of the New York Times bestseller list for 6 months. Right. Now, there is no academic in India that I know of that is writing at that level, that is producing a book which is highly scholarly and yet is beautifully written, wins prizes on its literary merit. I suppose the nearest person to it would be Ram Guha, but he's not actually an academic. He's not based in a university. He's a independent scholar.
Right.
And you're only now beginning to see the rise of a group of historians who are a generation below me, who are writing academically sound, well-researched books, but which are written to be read, not to score points off your rivals, or written in impenetrable postmodern post-colonial prose to get into the Subaltern Studies Collective, RIP. But I'm thinking of Manu Pillai or Ira Mukoti, this younger generation of writers who are writing very scholarly works of history that you can trust, which are sourced to original sources, but which are not just written for other academics. They're written to be read.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's certainly the tradition I've always worked in, and I've been very lucky, I think, in that the kind of history I was writing was very unremarkable, because many of my the kind of history I was writing was very unremarkable in Britain, where there were many other historians writing those sorts of books. I'm thinking of Anthony Beevor or Simon Sebag Montefiore, but here no one was really. I mean, 10 years ago there wasn't a biography of a single mogul in Britain that you could buy,
it's
and
actually
on that vacuum. To be honest, I mean, I've had a very nice 20 years of writing the company quartet, the 4 books: White Moguls, Last Mughal, Return of a King, and the Anarchy, filling a gap which no one else was really occupying. I mean, it's changing now. We're now seeing many very fine writers writing works of history which are both scholarly and readable and well written. But for the last 20 years, I in a sense had this to myself, and I'm very grateful.
It's quite surprising actually, because if you know the Indian history, it's like it's some Game of Thrones for so many years. I mean, it's got all the sort of masala that one. It's surprising that this hadn't happened before.
It is surprising, and I mean, I think part of the problem was that in the post-colonial period, the Indian academic world, and particularly I think the humanities and history, were very much dominated by the left, and often the Marxist left. And there were very, very fine scholars like Romila Thapa and Irfan Habib and so on,
Absolutely,
who were writing. But that sort of Marxist history is highly economic and highly social. That there's very little biography. The idea in Marxist history is that there are wider economic and social forces which shape man's destiny, and that the individual, whether he's a sultan or a king, plays less of a role. So left-leaning academics have always been suspicious of biography and history told through human beings. Now, elsewhere in the world, people don't see that as an unbridgeable divide. When we're trying to understand Prime Minister Modi, we don't say it's just because he's got a good economic system behind him and the Indian economy is doing well. We understand that personality plays a role too. That if Modi and Amit Shah weren't the men they were, the history of India over the last 5 years would have been very different. And if Rahul Gandhi equally had not, was a different man, was a stronger man, was a brighter man, we would have, we wouldn't have seen the landslide.
yes.
And so we know from our own times that that human affairs are not simply a matter of wider economic forces, though they play a part, nor are they entirely a matter of biography and of individuals, though that plays a part. We know that in fact it's both, and I think history should be written in that way too. That it's absolutely essential to take in matters of economic and social history and the forces which shape our destinies and have shaped historical destiny. But it's also important that you include human affairs. And I think this left-leaning approach to history, academically sound as it is, has simply turned many people off. And Irfan Habib is, writing wonderful stuff about feudalism and Mughal agricultural issues, but that's not necessarily what you want to read of an evening after a hard day's work when the other option is Netflix. I can't admire Irfan Habib more. I think he's a wonderful.
Or Romila Thapar,
Or any, they're absolutely cutting edge historians, all of them.
Yes.
But none of them believe that history should be dominated by individuals and a biographical and narrative approach to history. which has left a gap. And so for many years, you had an Indian history that, as Sunil Kulnani put it in his book Incarnations, was curiously unpeopled. That there was, Indian history was a matter of feudalism and capitalism, but there were no people in it, which made it very hard to read. Now, I personally don't believe that history, which is written with biographical and narrative focus, needs to be or should be unscholarly. I spent 5 years on each of my big history books. There's the Mughal Quartet, the Company Quartet took me 20 years to write. I published the first volume in 2002, and I just published Anarchy in 2019. I began work, I think, in 1998 on the White Moments. And now 5 years each is the equivalent of doing a PhD full time. I'm not really doing anything else. I was at the Jaipur Festival and a few other journalistic gigs, but basically it's 5 years solid work. And there's a huge amount of research in each of those books. But I try to write them in prose which people want to read, that is as beautifully written as I can make it. And this is what Gibbon, for example, did. And people used to look forward to Gibbon's book. This is what my great hero, Sir Stephen Runciman, historian of Byzantium and the Crusades, does. In modern times, this is what Peter Frankopan or Simon Sharma or Stephen Greenblatt do. It's just an oddity that no one in Indian academia has made the bridge, has really effectively written books which are major international prize-winning works of non-fiction, but which are also scholarly. To give you, I mean, the contrast is very interesting with Indian fiction and Indian non-fiction. Now, in Indian fiction, the Indian first 11, if you like, Arundhati Roy, Salman Rushdie, Vikram Seth, Amitav Ghosh, is world-class. You've got, in a sense, the world's greatest bowler, batsman, and fielders there. And every year you expect to see at least one Indian, often more, or their rival Pakistanis on the Booker Prize short.
Right.
The same is not true of Indian non-fiction. The Samuel Johnson Prize, now called the Baillie Gifford Prize, it got renamed this year, has been going for 20 years. And I think Ram Guha got longlisted once, and Samant Subramaniam got shortlisted once. As far as I'm aware, there's no other Indian passport holders that have ever appeared on a list, even a long list, other than those two in 20 years. And it's a striking contrast. You know, you have some of the very greatest novelists here, but for some reason, non-fiction has traditionally, or certainly for the last 2 decades, been much less strong. That's changing. And a new generation of writers is coming up who are very good. And I would imagine that people like Manu Pillai will be sweeping the board internationally with their books once they get into their stride. But as I say, in a sense, I've been lucky. I mean, I think it would have been very difficult to have been a incoming Gora Farangi novelist in India in the last 20 years, given that the quality of the work coming out from everyone from Kiran Desai, Aravind Adiga to the other guys, Rushdie, Seth, Roy, you know, they were world-beating, top-class fiction.
Right. William,
but I've been lucky in a sense. There's been a gap in the market. There hasn't been prize-winning works of history coming out of India, and I've been able to make my career in that space.
William, the other thing that you are involved with deeply is, as you just said, is the Jaipur Literature Festival. But you know, this the corona pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, you know, it's like it sort of made us fear each other. You know, there is always a suspicion, you know, that you shouldn't go near. I mean, the whole thing is about not meeting, you know, not being with people. How do you think? I mean, you know, the JLF has always has prided itself on being the largest literary meet in the world. So how do you think, I mean, the crowds will diminish, people will be sort of a little wary of being there, you know, next year?
Well, we're in discussion about this obviously now, and it's too early to say what will happen. I mean, yes, it's a very difficult situation. I think it's extremely unlikely that we'll get the huge international authors flying in. It's extremely unlikely we'll get the big crowds. And it's extremely unlikely, given the economy, that we'll get the sponsorship, which will keep the thing afloat.
That's the other part, yes.
So in the short term, we definitely have a problem. What Hey on Why did this year, they had their festival 2 weeks ago, and what they did was to have it online. And it was a major national event still. I mean, there were record numbers of people logging in every day for the week of Hay. And they also, because like us, they were hit for sponsors in the pandemic. Like us, they needed to find a solution to that, so they put out an appeal. Peter Florence had something called the Haymakers, and anyone that wanted to contribute to Hay gave money, and they got a lot of money in. We may well have to do something like that. Let's see. I mean, it's early days. We've got till January. But my guess is that this is going to be a difficult year, and we'll probably have to be online, or if we have something at Jaipur, it'll be much smaller, and it'll just be a token event to keep the thing going.
The series.
Obviously, this isn't going to go on forever. We're going to the world will right itself at some point. One of the interesting things that emerged was we've had this series for online talks.
I was just coming to that. The series you just had, this JLF, the Brave New World series, where I think you've already completed 50 episodes, and it's done pretty well.
With huge numbers. It's very interesting. I mean, people haven't necessarily watched them on the live on the moment that we've been giving them, but they're all on YouTube, and the numbers we've been getting looking at YouTubes of the talks we put on have been enormous, absolutely enormous. Millions of people, millions of views, and it's really been quite a phenomenon how many people have logged on. I mean, people have got time on their hands, so to sit and listen to Siddhartha Mukherjee or Jhumpa Lahiri is obviously something people enjoy doing. And I say it's interesting that the Indian audiences haven't necessarily logged on to see the live event in huge numbers, but they have watched it in their own time on YouTube later. And so that's been a huge success. I mean, we've had record-breaking, world record-breaking numbers looking on the Brave New World, and we may have to do a version of that in January if things haven't picked up this year. We'll see. As it is, though, it's been great fun doing Brave New World, and we've got all sorts of authors who've never made it to Jaipur in person, like Alain de Botton or Robert McFarlane or Peter Carey, who've been part of our series and given amazing talks.
Yes, it's definitely opened up new. I mean, it's actually forced us to think in new ways. To do new things in this technology, like what we are just discussing on this platform.
One of the interesting things that emerged is, and I was talking earlier about Stephen Greenblatt. Now he appeared on our Brave New World series, and he talked about the plague during Shakespeare's London, and I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was something like, in Shakespeare's career, the globe was open for 300 months. Of those, the globe, the building was there for 300 months, but 90 of those were closed by law because of plague in London. So in other words, just under a third of Shakespeare's professional career was effectively spent under what we would call lockdown. So humanity has been here before. This is not a new situation. It's new to us. It's new to our generation, and we haven't had it since the Spanish flu. But humanity has dealt with this sort of thing before, and we will survive, and life will go on and resume in time.
I wanted to ask you, as a historian, how do you think history will sort of judge this pandemic? As you just mentioned, the Spanish flu, but when you go back and look at it, soon after we had the Roaring '20s, and not too many people really remember the details of. I mean, the flu has come back in some ways because of the pandemic in our, in our memory, in our writing and reading. How do you think history will judge this pandemic? I mean, is it going to make some fundamental changes?
Well, I very much hope that we go on to the Roaring '20s again. The Roaring '20s was the era of Gatsby, the cocktail shaker, Hemingway. I would very much like to be part of a Roaring '20s again when this is over.
Hollywood at its best, at its inventive best. It's probably the best decade in terms of, artistic as well as technical, advancement.
So let's keep our fingers crossed. No, I mean we will get through this. It isn't new. Humanity has done this before. People will die. There will be many tragedies, but we will live to fight another day. And it's been it's been for many writers a productive and artistically prolific period. It isn't an entirely negative period. We haven't all just gone to sleep for 10 weeks. And we'll come out of it and fighting. So,
And
but I think we definitely bring on the Roaring Twenties, I say.
but do you think in terms of you just said that this is going to lot many books will come out, a lot of art might come out. What do you think the nature of that might be? I mean, are we looking at a sort of a dystopian, dark kind of an outpouring, or do you think, of course, there'll be a mix of all that, but largely speaking, how do you think this pandemic has affected the artistic mind?
I mean, it's difficult to say. For me, I've certainly, without distraction, I've been able to disappear into my historical rabbit burrow and have had a very prolific and exciting few months. But I can't talk for what other people will do. It's going to be exciting to see. But there's no question that this will be, if you have a load of writers stuck at home with nothing else to do, they will produce a lot of work. So let's see what happens. I know many people who are deep in novels, and they're all saying that while they're lonely and they're missing bars and restaurants, and there have been many negative sides to this, they're also saying that this is something which may have its positive side. So let's hope so.
Thank you very much, William. It's as always an absolute delight to speak to you. And as you just said, let's hope we get over this, and then the Roaring Twenties is awaiting us.
Bring it on, Satish.
Thank you.
In the meantime, we can all get on with some writing.
Yes. Thank you, William, for joining the Outlier.
Thank you, Satish. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.